There's three phases of life. There's youth, there's middle age, and then you look good. Thanks for graduating me to you look good. Appreciate that. Shock. The numbers, and I'm sorry you're kind of over there to the left and over to the right. Hopefully that's not too awkward. Allison asked me to come some months ago on a dream that she had to bring people together under these, sense of belonging and togetherness, and she didn't really have a clarity about where or how it was going to come together, but she asked me if I would come speak, and I said yes. And I said, but could you tell me when and where and when it comes all together? And look at this is amazing. And I'm not sure how to say it, that how much I feel, honored's a weird word, but just a sense of a weight to being here and wanting to be useful. And hopefully we can chat for a minute and find some common ground around a lot of very complicated things that happen in our lives. One of them, for me, is fame. Fame is a thief. Fame steals accountability. When you're I'm kind of mildly famous at this point. Like people in my hometown kind of know me. But fame is a very dangerous thing. But it also have a lot of comedy. Like in the airport the other day, I'm walking through with my kids and my wife, because we're headed out to Cedar City to see my boy, who was Utah Shakespeare Festival this summer. He was a working actor. And so we were in the airport, and someone said, "Steve Young," and you can see my kids go, "Oh, geez, here we go." And this fellow was with, I'm assuming his mother. It seemed like that was the relationship. And he said, "Steve Young, I really loved you. You were the greatest." And he turns to his mother and says, "Mom, this is Steve Young." And before he can even say anything more, she goes, "Oh, I hate him." And then she goes, "Oh, I'm a Raider fan." It's a weird thing. And if you've ever met anyone of any kind of fame, Ben Schillaty or Charlie, or, you meet famous people, the first thing that you say is always the stupidest thing in the world. It's amazing. I had it happen to me. I met Charlton Heston once, one of the greatest actors of all time. And I went, "Mr. Heston, I loved you in Big Her." And I was like, he goes, he can say like, "Oh, thanks a lot, but it's Ben-Hur," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that famous epic that I can't even say the right thing to." So, anyway, we all live in a circle in many ways, because our experiences, regardless of our relative fame in our homes or in our neighborhoods or in our cities or towns or even broader, there's always those interactions that can bring, I think, a level of visibility to the relationship. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, is relationships and how we see each other. I played in the NFL for 18 seasons, and I'm going to try to say this very quickly, because this story is not about me comparing myself to anyone else in the audience. This is just my story about an experience of being seen. And so as I played, let me go quickly back. I grew up with separation anxiety, which meant as a little kid, I didn't know what it was, but I would never sleep over at anyone else's house. During the day, I'd go to school, I was captain of sports, I was, grade student, but then at nighttime, I came home. Because I needed, and that was just a part of my genetics, I needed to be at home where it was safe and comfortable, and when my parents would try to leave town, I would freak out. When we traveled, or I would never go to a scout camp, or to, friends would go, "Hey, come with us skiing." I'm like, "Oh no, sorry, I got football practice," or "Oh, sorry." I was home. And the most difficult thing I ever did in my life up to this point was to go to college and to leave home and go across the country. And so my parents knew this. They didn't know what it was, but they knew that I needed help. And so they found a family that was here in Provo, and they landed at BYU, who I could go live with, essentially. So it could be the sights and sounds of family that would make me feel more comfortable. And that's how I kind of made it through. I barely made it through. I begged my parents every day to come home. I told my roommates when I first had called for school down at Hillman Halls, I'm like, don't worry about it, I'm not going to be here long, I'm going back home. And they're like, guy's weird, you know? I never unpacked my bags. So that's my life. My life is from there, and all the things that have happened, bring that with you, okay? No matter what you see me do, bring that part with you to understand kind of who I am. So now fast forward to a number of years, and I'm replacing Joe Montana, one of the greatest player that ever lived, and I'm now replacing him, and everything in comparison is that I'm not as good. No matter what you do, you can't live up to something like that, because nobody remembers anything that he did wrong. Nobody ever remembers anything that went wrong, or a loss, or an incompletion, or an interception. And so as you try to live in those shoes, you tend to get defensive. And you tend to get more sense of that you're a sense that you're being mistreated, and that as I played that season, and we didn't do as well, things got worse, and then it seemed like the whole country, the whole world was now focused on me and how I was failing. And one day in the San Francisco Chronicle, on the top of the front page, the Gulf War had broken out in 1991, and we declared war in the Middle East. And on the front page of the top of underneath the San Francisco Chronicle was this headline that says, "The Gulf War, it's Steve Young's fault." Funny, right? It's funny. Except it's not funny, right? Because I'm living it. And I remember that day. I remember feeling that, and feeling the eyeballs of the world, and the disdain, and the sense that I was, alone, so alone. And so that led me in the next few weeks into a pattern of sleeplessness and depression, and I kind of dug myself into a hole. I got to a point where it got so bad before one game that the people that I was living with, the family, really were worried. And it came to be the weekend and time to play, and they're like, "Steve, how are you going to do this?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but we're doing it." And they said, "Well, I don't know what's going on, but just promise us that you will talk to the team doctor about what's going on lately with you." And I said, "Well, I can't do that if we lose. But if we win, I promise you I will." Because you can't lose and then have an excuse, in football. You have to win, and then you can have something that you can talk about. And so we ended up winning the game. Off of 72 hours of no sleep, I actually played okay, which is super crazy. And we won. And after the game, I remember being underneath in the locker room, underneath the Candlestick Park, and it was kind of old and dank and dark. And I remember I had showered, and I was getting my ice on my shoulder, and I thought, I promised that I would talk to the team doctor about what I was going through. And so I did. Jim Clint, who's now passed away, was a wonderful team doctor, but he was kind of, he'd been there from the early days of the 49ers, all the Super Bowls, and so I saw him as one of the made men in the organization, somebody I kind of revered and was not necessarily comfortable with, but I knew I had to chat with him. So I pulled him in a corner, and his nickname was Reggie, and so I called him Reggie. And I pulled him in the corner, I said, "Reggie, I'm going through something, I don't really know what it is, I'm trying to figure it out, I'm not sleeping much, and I've kind of been miserable, and I'm trying to tell him kind of the basics." And as I'm telling him, we're like really close to each other in the corner and back, tucked away in the training room, and we're kind of face to face. And I notice that as I'm talking, a big ball of tear, comes out of his eye and falls down his cheek. And I'm like, "Reggie, are you crying?" And then he says, "Steve, I barely made it through medical school with severe anxiety. And I have watched you for years here. Now, I've been there 4 years now. For years, and I had a sense that you were suffering from some of the same things that I did. But I didn't do anything about it. And the tears are my regret in not coming to help. And I'm so grateful that you've come forward. And I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, don't worry about it. I can't believe this is your reaction. Like, I'm so relieved. And the next day, I was diagnosed with adult undiagnosed childhood separation anxiety. Who knew? It's in the genetics. Crazy. But now we had a name. And for the first time I started, because I had a name, now I started to, and with his help, I started to feel seen in the way that who I really was. And in seeing me, it didn't make everything like super easy. I still had to go deal with all the things you have to deal with in life, but it made a fundamental difference in my life. And I am not comparing my experience of being seen to anyone, especially my brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community. I am saying that just in my experience to being seen, and because I want to talk about being seen, that's my experience of how I felt and how it made a difference in my life. About 10 years ago, my wife and I, Barb, who anyone knows Barb, is amazing. And we talk about the law of love, kind of natural at this, and that's where I've learned so much about it. We spoke at Affirmation, and up in Salt Lake City, Affirmation Conference. And Barb made this incredibly powerful speech at Affirmation, and I made a speech, and afterwards, everyone rushed up to surround her. And for one of the rare times in my life, which I loved, I was kind of, watching, And I liked it. It was maybe more natural for me. And I was loving how the response of people and the hugs and the love that she was feeling. But then, one by one, young men, kind of 22 to 24 years old, one by one, saying essentially the same thing, would come over and say to me, Steve, or Mr. Young, or Brother Young, whatever they want to say, like, hey, I'm kind of estranged from my dad, and we're not speaking very much, and our relationship is kind of broken. I'm giving you the gist of all of it kind of amalgamated into one person. And, but I know he loves you. And because he loves you, would you take a picture with me? Because if I could send him the picture of you and I, then maybe he would see me a little differently. And so we took the pictures, of course. But you can tell how I feel about that even today. Is what I saw was a warriorship seeking to be seen. And what I loved about that moment and cherished about that moment is to see young people seeking relationship and looking for it in any way possible, and saw me as a venue to be seen. There's nothing greater in many ways than to have somebody see you. I'll give quotes. To see you in a way that is healing, it's relieving, it's empowering, and yet I don't think it's the full measure of the seeing, because in my theology, I firmly believe in what's in Scripture, that there is a capability given to human beings that under certain circumstances, we can see others, not just as I see you here today, not just in the moment that we have this, I see you today and it's who you are put together in all the years of life, but it's the snapshot today. I can actually see you as God sees you, like from end to end, from the beginning to the end, to the breadth and depth of eternity. Like, I believe a durable spirit sits inside of me. It's not of this place. And that durable spirit, God can see from beginning to end. And the gift that we can have is that we can actually share, although I think at first briefly, because we're human and it's hard to gather up this endowment, this transfigured eyesight. But I have an experience, another story I want to tell you about, of somebody who described to me this very kernel of the pure love of Christ that I want to describe. She was going through a divorce. They'd been married, 4 years, I want to say, no children. And the divorce had become quite acrimonious, as it will become. They'd meet at the lawyers, they would argue, it was difficult, painful, and every time this woman, who's a dear friend of mine, would come home, she would feel worse and lower and more distraught and more fatigue and more pain and yet more hate. And she started to pray for relief from this hole that she was now in. How in the world can I find bounty in this mess? Please help me, heaven, find some place of solace in this disaster. Time goes on. They get to the final divorce settlement that's going to be signed at the lawyer's office. And she goes to the lawyer's office to sign the final settlement. And as she goes out of the elevator, there's a big glass conference room where she sees sitting in there the lawyers and her soon-to-be ex-husband. The way she describes it, when I see him, something happened because it wasn't how I see him. It must have been this thing that you're describing, this pure love of Christ, Steve, because what I saw was the love that I felt for him was a love that God had for him. And it's incredible I can't even describe it, but it was overwhelming. And I started to weep. And as I wept, I was like taken aback, so I left back in the elevator, went downstairs and out in the parking lot to try to gather myself. And it took about 15, 20 minutes because what I felt was so alarming and so rich and beautiful in some ways that I just needed some time to try to process it. She did go back upstairs. She did go in the conference room, and they did get divorced. But she said I was changed. In just that glimpse, that brief moment that I saw him as God sees him, changed me. My relationship with him, how I thought about him, how I healed from the broken relationship. It was the beginning of a very much more profitable relationship. We're still divorced. But in that glimpse, just a glimpse, gave me a place and a confidence and a reality that I could start to heal. To me, that's the elements of Christ's atonement in action, in relationships. Christ can't make it better without us. We're his final messenger. And the promise is that we can have these glimpses. And maybe in time, that's how we live. And we can see others in ways that only God can see. And in that measure, the pure love of Christ, we can now govern and live and commune in a way that we could never imagine without it. And so, I recognize that the seeing is a journey. But the seeing journey has to start by leaving yourself behind. We live in a transactional world. It's just a state of being. Any scientist knows the word entropy? Everything in this experience rots. Everything dies. You look good. I mean, it sucks, right? We live in an environment, in the conditions, and I think a heavenly laboratory that has been made for us to grow and learn. I think it's purposeful. That's the one solace I have about You Look Good, is that it's purposeful. There's a reason. But the conditions of a body, agency, and opposition freely interacting, it's rough. I think God knew it was going to be rough. I think it's purposeful. Because in that purity, we can grow. That durable spirit inside of us can gather things that can't be gathered any other way. But in the midst of it, there's pain, and there's sorrow and heartbreak and just the bumps and bruises. And if we look at that relationship in transaction, I think that we're in a very, very dastardly place. And even when we have that relationship in heaven, with heaven, in a transactional way. In other words, very sacredly, I say, God, tell me what to do, I'll do it, and then you bless me. At its root, it's self-interested. Not for a bad thing, but at its root, it's self-interested. And therefore, like the entropic world that we live in, that relationship will rot over time in self-interest. It's inevitable. When I go back to seeing, as I described how I felt being seen, and how we need to see other people, we need to start to practice non-transactional seeing, which means I have to leave anything that I desire for me and put it aside and find a unencumbered, pure water, living water of intent for you. And in every relationship and every interaction, that intent will lead. I was trying to turn left, what was it, 2 days ago? I was in a hurry. My wife, she asked me to do something and I forgot. And I could get away with forgetting if I could get to the store in time and pick up the cupcakes that she asked to do for the birthday thing for her dear friend in time, but I had done something else and forgotten, and now I had to get there quickly, and I could still get them there and save the day without the pain and agony that would ensue. And so I'm in the left-hand turn lane behind a gentleman, and I could see he was a gentleman because in the rear view I could see it through the mirror, and the light turned green. And I'm like, go! But I didn't say anything, but that's my feeling. It's like, go! And nothing happened. And I'm like, and I remembered my own truth about what I'm trying to teach myself and my children and my friends and my family. And now I'm here expressing it to you. What would I do? I'm now in a relationship. He and I are in a relationship. Yes? Will it be a long one? Who knows? But probably not, right? Probably not. So, what do? And I decided through some miracle to just breathe. Just breathe, see? He's gonna see it. Like, just let it be for a minute. If he doesn't see it, the whole light, and it turns red again, maybe our relationship will have to change. But for right now, I'm just gonna breathe. And so I literally breathe. I'm like, whew, whew. And then he went. And then I went. And then we got stopped at the next light, side by side. And I looked over at him, and our relationship was better. It was richer. It was. if I would honked at him, you know that I would have walked up and got next to him and I've been like, and he would have been, and now there's this thing. It's small, this is small, it's stupid, right? But it's the kernels of relationship that are transactional. And if you can leave yourself and say to yourself, what can I do in this moment in my marriage, at home with my children, at work, on the streets, or at the left turn signal? What can I do in this moment as I breathe to bring peace, a spirit of healing, goodness, and even love to this relationship? We're in it, for good or bad. What can I do? And I feel like to think about it in a kind of a doctrinal way is the atonement's out here to benefit and bless and heal. Bring it with you. Doesn't mean that someone's not going to honk at you. Doesn't mean that the person that you're trying to heal doesn't just threaten you and you have to run. Like, I understand there's all kinds of, in my book I talk about abuse, I talk about abusive relationships, I talk about being safe and taking care of yourself and make sure the oxygen mask is on you first. But my intent every day in my relationships is to bring forward a selfless love, peace, healing spirit to every relationship. Because the irony of it all is that in the very doing of leaving my transactional state of wanting to bless you because then you'll follow me, or bless you because you'll do what I think is right, or bless you because I want to heal you because you'll obey me, or that there's some transaction in it. It can't be. It has to be pure. But in the purity, the irony is that, like my friend who was getting divorced, what happened when she introduced this truth into her relationship that was so acrimonious? Who was healed immediately? She was. I didn't honk. I walked up, and I had a profitable relationship with someone. It was mine. You're suffering, struggling. You're in a hole of depression. I've been there. I promise you the way out is seeking others' healing and wellness. You have to take care of yourself. We're in a transactional state. You have to make yourself whole and well. But there is something that can be. I'm going to do one scripture. I'm sorry. It's Moses 139. My work and my glory is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man and women, of everyone, of my children. God's mission statement. My work is you. My glory comes through your eternal life and immortality. So your glory, I receive glory through you receiving glory. I love through your reception. And in that relationship is a guide for us. Because the way out, the most dastardly, complex Gordian knots that I've been in the last 10 years, and some of them are pretty complex, I was lost. I didn't know what to go, how could I go forward? And this is how I figured out what is my way forward. Is the state of not to do, people always say, well, if you'll do these things, you can get out of this Gordian knot. If you do these things, and I realized that those are all transactional words. What do I need to be? Not do, who do I need to be to work out this Gordian knot that I'm in? And the states of being are listed very clearly. Long-suffering, gentle persuasion, meekness, and love. And so I started to be those words. If you're going to be long-suffering, what would the language be? If I was going to be in a state of long-suffering, how would I act? How would I be?
if I was going to be gentle in my persuasion, if I was going to be meek, what would those words sound like? What would my mannerisms be? And what is pure love, unencumbered by transaction? What does that sound like? And I started to take on the challenge, the Gordian knot, the complexity that I had. And what happened with these states of being was that the irony and the promise of heaven is all of a sudden I got poured back all this information that helped me find the way through. So I guess the net of it all is that I pray that I can see you as God sees you, in the fullness and the wholeness and the beauty and the complete and the utter amazing warriors that we are as we've taken bodies in faith, in purity. And the rawness of this life, and we can lay on top experiences that we see today, but I want to be able to see you in that way. And that could be the greatest blessing to me. But I know me being seen in the brief moments that I have in my own experience that's not comparable, how I felt about being seen in an elevated way. And so people always wonder, how do we get out of this mess that we're in politically, in acrimony and divisiveness and challenge and all the complexity of life? It has to start here. Because if we live in transaction, we will get transactional answers from heaven. We will get transactional answers from the prayers we have. We'll get transactional answers from the people that we're making deals with. If your marriage is a deal, it doesn't work. Deals are not to be made for long-lasting, everlasting relationships. A covenant is a binding. It's not a deal. It's a binding. That we'll do this together. We're bound to God to do it together. It's no deal. God is not Santa Claus. God seeks our growth in a pure system, and she's willing to watch for its growth wherever it can be. And Christ is here to help heal it as we bump along. But we have to be the full authors of this scene, and we have to do it in selfless, long-suffering, gentle persuasion, meekness, and love. My prayer to you, again, is that I can see you in that way. And then we have a way forward. And then we can solve all the Gordian knots that we're entwined in. I know that I haven't seen my last complexity and challenge, but I do know how I'm going to attack. I do know how I'm going to find the way through. And with that vision, we can leave behind transactional messes, whether it's in our own lives, in our church, in our work life, in the human foibles of transactional behavior can't last. When we see them in history or into the future, you know that you don't have to drag them forward. Because we know that in a perpetual state, that heaven is, that Zion is, any kind of celestial being has to be in a perpetual state, and the only perpetual law that can be there is a selfless law. And think about Moses' first time up the mountain. It's this law. And so I pray that it can be a part of your life and how you heal and how you find ways forward in complex situations. My love is to you in the LGBTQ community. I am, through my experiences, I feel somewhat connected today to be here and to be in front of you, mostly because I wish my wife was right here, because then you'd rush up and love her because she's amazing. But I'm loving that this has come together. I'm loving that I'm a part of it, and I hope that when we see each other on the street, yell, where's the green arrow? That's our signal, okay? So if you see me at the airport or on the street somewhere, it's like, just yell green arrow, and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, we're connected, we're sweet, you know? So that we can be together and we can have a relationship. Because if we see each other out on the street, I want a relationship with you. Much love to you. Much selfless, unencumbered, pure love for you. I want to leave. Thank you very much for having me.